Some sci-fi films don't just flop, they get buried. Studios panic, critics sharpen their knives, and entire projects vanish from the cultural conversation like they never happened. But what if those forgotten failures weren't failures at all? What if Hollywood buried some of its most daring experiments because they were too strange, too bold, or too far ahead of their time? Let's dig up 12 sci-fi gems the industry tried to erase. Dark City, 1998. Imagine waking up in a city where the sun never rises. Your memories feel borrowed, and pale, bald figures shift reality like stagehands moving scenery. That's Dark City, a film so visually bold and philosophically heavy that Roger Ebert called it the best movie of 1998. Yet most audiences never saw it because the studio lost its nerve and sabotaged it before it even had a chance to shine. Directed by Alex Proyas, the same man behind The Crow, Dark City tells the story of John Murdoch, a man who wakes up accused of murder with no memory of his past. He stumbles through a noir-soaked metropolis under the control of the Strangers, sinister beings who rearrange buildings, rewrite identities, and essentially toy with human reality. The result? A surreal urban nightmare that blends German expressionism with retro futuristic design. But here's the kicker. The studio was so terrified audiences wouldn't get it that they slapped a voiceover at the very beginning that spoiled the entire mystery. Imagine watching The Sixth Sense and being told Bruce Willis is a ghost in the first 2 minutes. That's the level of sabotage Dark City endured. The film earned just $27 million against a $40 million budget, crushed financially, and overshadowed the very next year by The Matrix, which borrowed heavily from its themes and aesthetic. Over time, the director's cut restored Proyas' vision, removing the voiceover and letting viewers experience the mind-bending puzzle as intended. Today, Dark City is hailed as one of the most influential sci-fi films of the 90s, a cult classic whispered about in the same breath as Inception. Hollywood tried to bury it, but cinephiles resurrected it. Strange Days, 1995. What if you could slip on a device and live inside someone else's memories? Every sensation, every thrill, every horror, as if it were your own? That was the eerie premise of Strange Days, directed by Catherine Bigelow and co-written by James Cameron. Released in 1995, it wasn't just ahead of its time, it was prophetic. And that, perhaps, was its downfall. The story follows Lenny Nero, played by Ralph Fiennes, a sleazy ex-cop who deals in illegal memory recordings. These squid devices allow people to relive experiences, from car chases to intimate encounters, as if they're happening again. When Lenny stumbles upon a memory disk containing the recording of a brutal murder, he uncovers a conspiracy tied to corruption, police brutality, and racial tensions. Sound familiar? It should. Strange Days tackled themes that would dominate headlines decades later, long before body cams and viral footage were part of everyday life. But audiences in 1995 weren't ready. The film was violent, grim, and unflinching in its depiction of societal decay. Critics didn't know what to make of it, and the box office numbers were brutal, earning just $8 million against a $42 million budget. Mainstream Hollywood quickly distanced itself, burying what might have been Bigelow's boldest statement. Here's the irony. The very things that doomed Strange Days are what make it so chillingly relevant today. The immersive POV shots, when characters experience squid recordings, are still jaw-dropping, plunging viewers directly into another person's skin. Angela Bassett shines as Mace, a tough limo driver who becomes the film's true moral anchor. Her performance remains one of the most underrated of the decade. Over time, the film found new life among sci-fi fans who recognized it wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning. Hollywood tried to bury Strange Days because it made people uncomfortable. Today, that discomfort feels like foresight. Cube 1997. 6 strangers wake up in a giant cube-shaped maze. Every room looks identical, but some are rigged with traps so brutal they feel ripped from your worst nightmares. Razor wire grids that slice people into pieces, acid sprays that melt skin, and pressure plates that trigger instant death. That's the setup for Cube, a low-budget Canadian thriller that turned claustrophobia into pure cinematic terror. Director Vincenzo Natali had just $350,000 to work with, so he built one room and reused it endlessly. By simply swapping out colored lighting panels, he created the illusion of an infinite labyrinth. That limitation became the film's genius. The world feels endless, even though it's all smoke and mirrors. With nowhere to run, the real danger became psychological. Paranoia, fear, and mistrust pushed the characters to the brink as they struggled to find an escape. The death scenes shocked critics. Some dismissed them as torture gimmicks, but what really unnerved viewers was the way the film peeled back human behavior under stress. Who do you trust when survival is on the line? How much cruelty are people capable of when the stakes are life and death? Cube forced audiences to confront those ugly questions. It never got a proper theatrical release in the US, which meant mainstream audiences missed it completely. But word of mouth made it a cult classic. It spawned 2 sequels, a Japanese remake, and influenced countless filmmakers. Even Christopher Nolan has cited Cube as an example of high-concept storytelling done right. Hollywood didn't kill Cube outright, it ignored it. But ignoring it only made it grow in legend. Today, it stands as proof you don't need millions to create unforgettable sci-fi horror. You just need one room, one idea, and nerves of steel. Hardware 1990. Picture this. A dystopian junk scavenger brings home a pile of robot parts as a gift for his girlfriend, who happens to be an artist. What neither of them know is that the parts belong to a military killbot called the MARK-13. In her apartment, the robot reassembles itself and begins a relentless killing spree, turning everyday household items into weapons. That's Hardware, a film as grimy and dangerous as the industrial soundtrack it blasted. Directed by Richard Stanley, Hardware looked like it was made on a shoestring, but the visuals were pure nightmare fuel. Saturated reds and blues made every frame feel like a fever dream, while the claustrophobic apartment setting amped up the tension. Imagine the Terminator locked inside a one-bedroom flat, but with the anarchic energy of a punk concert. That's the vibe. The soundtrack featured industrial heavyweights like Ministry and Public Image Limited, which only added to its cult edge. But controversy nearly buried the movie. The British Board of Film Classification briefly banned it for violence, and it faced a lawsuit from the creators of the comic 2000 AD, who claimed Stanley stole their story. With critics trashing it as exploitative junk, Hardware should have disappeared into VHS bins forever. Instead, it developed a rabid cult following. Fans embraced its raw energy and apocalyptic vision. Ironically, Stanley's career collapsed after he was fired from his next big project, The Island of Dr. Moreau, leaving Hardware as his most infamous work. Hollywood may have dismissed it, but fans elevated it to cult legend. If you want proof that chaos can become art, Hardware is the perfect example. Hollywood tried to strangle it, but it still roars like feedback from a broken speaker. Screamers, 1995. Based on a Philip K. Dick short story, Screamers dropped audiences into a bleak mining colony on a distant planet where the biggest threat isn't enemy soldiers, it's the machines humanity built to protect them. Known as Screamers, these autonomous weapons hunt by detecting heartbeats, shredding anything alive with spinning blades. Chilling enough, right? Except the machines have started evolving on their own. Peter Weller, fresh off RoboCop, stars as a battle-weary commander who discovers that Screamers are no longer just mechanical predators. They've learned to mimic humans. Suddenly, trust becomes impossible. Your ally could be your executioner in disguise. The paranoia is relentless, and the film toys with your nerves by showing Screamers in increasingly disturbing forms. One of the most haunting, a childlike figure clutching a teddy bear, begging for help, before transforming into a whirling death trap. With a $20 million budget, Screamers had ambition, but outdated effects and sloppy marketing doomed it to failure. Critics dismissed it as a cheap Terminator knockoff, and the movie made little impact at the box office. But they missed the deeper horror. Screamers was less about jump scares and more about the terrifying reality of machines making choices without human control. Today, military experts point to Screamers as an eerily accurate warning about autonomous drones and AI-driven weapons. What once seemed far-fetched now feels like headlines waiting to happen. Hollywood brushed Screamers aside as a B-movie misfire. Looking back, it feels more like a prophecy. Sometimes the films we bury are the ones that see the future most clearly. The 13th Floor, 1999. What happens when your whole world turns out to be just one level of a simulation? That was the hook of The 13th Floor, a moody sci-fi mystery that asked the same reality-bending questions as The Matrix, but released just a few weeks later. It never stood a chance. Overshadowed by Keanu Reeves and Bullet Time, this thoughtful noir experiment was left in the dust. The story follows Douglas Hall, a computer scientist who discovers that his mentor has built a fully functional simulation of 1937 Los Angeles. When the mentor is murdered, Hall dives into the simulated world to solve the crime, only to realize his own reality may be just another layer. The film contrasts two worlds beautifully, the sleek modern cityscapes and the meticulously detailed period setting of the 1930s, where the smoke cars and neon glow feel hauntingly authentic. Directed by Joseph Rusnak and produced by Roland Emmerich, yes, the disaster movie guy behind Independence Day, the movie had brains instead of explosions. It asked the same philosophical questions that philosophers now debate under the banner of simulation theory. What makes reality real? If we can't tell the difference, does it even matter? Yet, audiences weren't in the mood for quiet questions when The Matrix had just blown the doors off with kung fu and leather coats. The 13th Floor pulled in only $15 million against its $16 million budget and quietly disappeared from theaters. Today, though, it has a cult following among sci-fi fans who see it as the more philosophical patient cousin of The Matrix. Hollywood tried to bury it, but those who found it realized it asked the scariest question of all. If reality is fake, then what are you standing on right now? Johnny Mnemonic, 1995. Keanu Reeves storing gigabytes of data in his brain, Ice-T leading a gang of junkyard rebels, and a cybernetically enhanced dolphin hacking into corporate systems. Johnny Mnemonic is either the worst sci-fi movie of the 90s or a visionary cult classic, depending on who you ask. Hollywood, at the time, filed it under embarrassment. Based on a William Gibson story, the godfather of cyberpunk, the film imagined a dystopian 2021 where corporations rule and half the population suffers from a tech-induced disease. Reeves plays Johnny, a data courier who literally uploads sensitive files into his head and must offload them within 24 hours or die. It's an absurd but eerily prophetic idea in a world now dominated by data storage and privacy debates. Production was, chaotic. Director Robert Longo wanted a moody, cerebral cyberpunk story, but studio execs demanded an action-heavy blockbuster. The result was a bizarre clash of tones, Reeves delivering his infamous "I want room service" monologue with deadly seriousness, while Ice-T plots revolution from a junkyard. And yes, the dolphin scene, which defies explanation, cemented its reputation as a mess. With a $26 million budget, the film grossed just $19 million worldwide. Critics annihilated it, and Hollywood quickly buried it as a misfire. But here's the twist. Over time, fans embraced its messy weirdness. Its clunky VR graphics look hilarious now, but its warnings about corporate power and tech addiction hit uncomfortably close today. Hollywood tried to erase it, but memes, cult screenings, and the enduring curiosity of cyberpunk fans keep dragging it back to the surface. For all its flaws, Johnny Mnemonic is unforgettable, and sometimes unforgettable is better than perfect. eXistenZ, 1999. David Cronenberg has never been a filmmaker to play it safe. With eXistenZ, he took his signature brand of body horror and plugged it straight into the virtual reality craze. The result? A film so strange, so unsettling, and so grotesquely imaginative that audiences simply didn't know what to do with it. And because it premiered just weeks before The Matrix, it was doomed to live in its shadow. The story centers on Allegra Geller, a game designer played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who creates a new kind of gaming experience where players connect bioorganic game pods directly into their spines through fleshy ports. These pods look like pulsing organs, and the controllers are made of bone and cartilage. Players, including Jude Law's character, quickly find themselves lost in layers of reality, unable to tell whether they're in the game or the real world. Cronenberg leaned all the way into his trademark obsessions: guns made of bone that fire human teeth, mutating bodies that blur the line between human and machine. Dialogue that shifts mid-scene as realities fold into one another. It's less a straightforward narrative and more like a fever dream that never stops changing the rules. The Berlin Film Festival awarded it the Silver Bear, but when it hit theaters, audiences were baffled. Mainstream critics dismissed it as weird for weird's sake, and ticket sales collapsed. Hollywood didn't even bother giving it a fighting chance. Marketing was minimal, and it quickly disappeared. But today, in an age of VR headsets and talk of the metaverse, eXistenZ feels eerily ahead of its time. Cronenberg wasn't just making another sci-fi flick. He was making a prophecy about how immersive tech could warp our sense of reality. Buried by Hollywood, resurrected by cult fans, it's one of the strangest but sharpest films sci-fi ever produced. Freejack, 1992. How do you bury a sci-fi film with Emilio Estevez, Anthony Hopkins, and Mick Jagger? Easy release. Freejack. On paper, it had all the makings of a blockbuster. In practice, it became one of the strangest, most derided sci-fi flops of the 90s. But buried underneath the mockery is a film that asks questions about immortality and corporate greed that feel frighteningly relevant today. The premise is bonkers. In 2009, the ultra-wealthy cheat death by body-jacking people moments before they die in accidents. Estevez plays a race car driver snatched out of time seconds before a fatal crash. His body is meant to host the mind of a dying billionaire, but he escapes and finds himself hunted in a dystopian future. Who's leading the manhunt? Mick Jagger, in his first major acting role, chewing the scenery like it's an encore at Wembley. Anthony Hopkins, meanwhile, looks like he signed on during a coffee break between prestige projects, and his gravitas can't quite hold the film together. The action is clumsy, the special effects already dated by 1992 standards, and the script veers between silly and absurd. The result was a $30 million production that limped to just $17 million in returns. Critics tore it to pieces, and yet, hidden in the chaos is a kernel of brilliance. The idea of the rich literally consuming the lives of the poor isn't far off from today's obsession with life extension tech and billionaires buying influence over health innovation. Freejack was messy, yes, but also weirdly ahead of its time. Hollywood tried to bury it, but if you watch it today, you'll find a sci-fi oddity that accidentally predicted more truth than it deserved to. Split Second, 1992. Rutger Hauer never phoned in a performance, and Split Second proves it. The film drops him into a near-future London, ravaged by climate change, where floodwaters swamp the city and rats scurry through subway tunnels. If that wasn't bleak enough, there's also a monstrous killer stalking the streets, a shape-shifting predator that may have psychic connections to its victims. And Hauer is the cop hell-bent on stopping it. The movie mashes together Blade Runner, Alien, and Predator into a single, rain-soaked cocktail. Hauer's character, Harley Stone, is a caffeine-addicted, chocolate-obsessed loner who packs more firepower than a small army. His tough guy quips and unhinged intensity keep the film from collapsing into parody, though just barely. The creature itself is mostly hidden until the climax, which builds suspense, but also frustrated viewers who expected more monster mayhem. Production was chaotic. The original director quit midway through, special effects ran over budget, and the final creature design looked suspiciously like a knockoff xenomorph. Still, the grim, flooded visuals gave the movie a gritty uniqueness. With a budget of just $7 million, it barely made a splash in theaters and was quickly forgotten. But over time, Split Second earned cult status. Fans embraced it as a messy but fascinating relic of early 90s sci-fi, a film that predicted rising seas and ecological collapse before those ideas were mainstream. Hollywood buried it as disposable B-movie junk, but like its monster, it refuses to stay hidden. Virtuosity, 1995. Long before Russell Crowe won an Oscar for Gladiator, he played SID-6.7, a computer-generated serial killer made up of the personalities of history's most dangerous criminals. Sound insane? It was. In Virtuosity, SID escapes into the real world thanks to experimental nanotechnology, forcing Denzel Washington's ex-cop character to hunt him down in a showdown of man versus machine-made monster. The concept was wild, and Crowe delivered a performance that has to be seen to be believed, maniacal, flamboyant, and clearly having the time of his life. At one point, SID even leads a nightclub in a bizarre dance sequence because why not? The film takes media violence to the extreme, with SID staging murders like theater for invisible audiences, mocking the way society consumes violence as entertainment. Washington, meanwhile, grounds the madness with his trademark intensity, even if the script often undermines him with clunky dialogue. Directed by Brett Leonard, who also made The Lawnmower Man, the film was supposed to cement him as Hollywood's virtual reality visionary. Instead, it bombed, earning $24 million on a $30 million budget, and critics dismissed it as empty spectacle. But here's where things get interesting. Virtuosity anticipated discussions about AI, algorithm-driven violence, and the glamorization of killers in media. What seemed over the top in 1995 feels disturbingly relevant in an era of social media and live-streamed chaos. Hollywood may have buried Virtuosity, but revisiting it today shows how sometimes the most ridiculed ideas end up being the most prescient. Nemesis, 1992. What do you get when you cross a low-budget action flick with cyberpunk philosophy and sprinkle in enough explosions to level half of Los Angeles? You get Nemesis, Albert Pion's chaotic vision of the year 2027. On paper, it sounds ridiculous. Olivier Gruner stars as Alex Rain, a cop who is 86.5% machine, but still clings desperately to the tiny shred of humanity left in him. On screen, it becomes a kinetic fever dream. Shot for around $2 million, the film uses real burned-out buildings left over from the Los Angeles riots to create its dystopian backdrop. That gritty realism gives Nemesis a raw edge you can't fake with sets or CGI. The story follows Alex as he's sent to hunt down cybernetic terrorists called Red Harvest Replicants, but the plot mostly serves as a launching pad for non-stop gunfights, wall-smashing stunts, and characters literally blowing holes through everything in sight. One of the most unforgettable moments involves a woman ripping open her chest to reveal hidden weaponry. Subtle, not even close. But that's the beauty of Nemesis. It leans all the way into excess. Critics ignored it or dismissed it as bargain bin Terminator, but VHS audiences ate it up, spawning 4 increasingly bizarre sequels. Pune's film became a cult darling, not because it was polished, but because it had ambition, a cheap movie trying to look and feel like a Hong Kong action spectacle wrapped in cyberpunk paranoia. Beneath the mayhem is a surprisingly thoughtful thread about transhumanism and identity. At what point does a man stop being human? Alex Rain doesn't have the answer, but his struggle gives the film an emotional hook that lingers. Hollywood may have written it off as junk, but fans kept it alive. Nemesis proves that even in the bargain bin, sometimes you'll find sparks of genius. So there you have it, 12 sci-fi films Hollywood tried to erase, but fans refused to forget. From buried gems like Dark City to messy chaos like Johnny Mnemonic, each one shows that bold ideas don't always survive the box office, but they can thrive in the shadows. Which of these misfits deserves a second life on your watch list? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep digging up the buried treasures.